we are going to be discussing everything I can think about pertaining to pre-flop ranges because for some reason, somehow, some way, people keep messing this stuff up. If you have any questions about pre-flop ranges, feel free to type them in. I'm very, very happy to discuss them because I want to make sure all of you do not screw up. Rocketbox Poker say you just downloaded the free pre-flop charts at pokercoaching.com. Good. That's exactly what I want you to do. Fairly effective. Subscribe for 2 months. Congrats. Awesome. Hope you're enjoying it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're going trick-or-treating today. We definitely are. My entire family's dressed as Pokemon. I am Squirtle because Squirtle becomes Blastoise, which is the best Pokemon. Do you enjoy teaching more than playing? It's good to mix it up. It's your birthday. Happy birthday, Vasily. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Mr. Bubble said you enjoyed the pre-show. Good. Well, if you enjoyed the pre-show, click the like and subscribe button. If you're here on time, like me, well, that's good too. All right. At pokercoaching.com, if you go there, if you log in, there will be a tools section on the left-hand side of the screen. Right here. Go there, click on that, and follow along if you'd like. I want to show you a few of the aspects of poker coaching that will go a long way to helping you learn to play good, strong, fundamentally sound strategies, okay? We have a few very key tools here for pre-flop poker. We have the GTO tournament pre-flop charts. We have GTO cash game pre-flop charts. Then we have downloadable pre-flop charts, okay? We also have push-fold charts, but I would generally recommend against using push-fold charts. Why? Because your options are not only all in or fold. You have a few options when you're playing poker. You can also limp. You can min raise. You can do whatever, right? You're allowed to call. Calling is actually a pretty good strategy sometimes. So these are the three main things I want you to really be focusing on. We're going to go through each of these. First things first, if you want everything kind of just given to you nice and easy so you can follow along and download it, I would recommend you go to the downloadable preflop charts. That's going to bring you here. Then we have a bunch of different types of preflop charts. Okay? Here at the top, we have 100 big blind exploitative preflop charts. Use these for small stakes cash games and tournaments when you're playing about 100 big blinds deep. These are not anywhere near GTO charts. You may ask, why give charts that are not GTO? Well, these charts here will essentially adjust to the fact that a lot of your players are going to be a little bit too loose, a little bit too splashy, a little bit too cautious. They're not going to 3-bet enough, etc., etc., etc. Right? So if your opponents are going to make those types of errors, which are very, very common, these charts are probably going to serve you well. These charts are a little bit too loose. They like to call and see flops in position. They play hands that flop a little bit better multi-way, etc., etc. That said, I usually do not lean too much on these charts because quite often you do not know specifically what your opponents do wrong. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So there you go. All right. Then we have these implementable charts. These are very important. 6-handed implementable charts. These are for cash games. This is when you're playing 100 big blinds deep against tough opponents with no ante. So typical 6-handed cash game online. Here we have same charts, but for 4-handed. You may say, why would you need different charts 4-handed than 6-handed? To be fair, you really don't. I think it's a little bit overkill. That said, I'm trying to have a good, full, robust poker site here. And you got to realize, whenever you're playing with fewer players at the table, you get to raise slightly wider. Okay? And the reason is because imagine you're playing 9-handed and it folds to you on the button. Say you're playing 9-handed and it folds to you on the button. What did the players who folded before you likely have? Well, if they folded, they probably didn't have the best hands. They probably didn't fold aces and kings and queens and jacks, right? That means there's a tiny bit more of a chance that the players yet to act have aces and kings and queens in their hand. Tiny bit higher chance. Now, obviously, everybody could have got dealt ace 3 offsuit and they all would have folded their ace 3 offsuits, presumably. But if they got dealt ace jack, they're not going to fold their ace jack, right? So when everyone folds to you on the button 9-handed, you actually have to be slightly tighter than if it's folded to you on the button 4-handed, right? And the same thing applies four-handed versus six-handed. You're going to find it actually is a pretty big difference, though. If you're playing a three-handed poker game on the button compared to a nine-handed poker game on the button when they fold to you, when you're, when everybody folds around to you, if you're three-handed, your first act, of course, you get to play a decent amount wider, like 10 or 15% more hands, which is actually a real number. 10 or 15% on top of your normal range, just a little bit more, right? So that's why we have different charts here, and these are very common online games. I try to give you charts for common spots. Common spots are very, very important to realize that that's what you need to be really, really studying and looking at, right? You want to have a good idea of how to play common spots so then you can adjust to play slightly less common spots. Like someone in the chat just asked, I saw it fly right by, all of you are commenting a lot today, that how would you play 60 big blinds even compared to 100? Well, using logic, suited connected hands go down in value. Big cards go up in value a little bit. Not a lot. Those 60 big blinds is not going to be all that different than 100 big blinds. That said, if you're playing like 20 big blinds, then you'll start to have pretty big differences, right? Essentially, as you get deeper and deeper, implied odds hands go up in value, and hands that lack implied odds go down in value. All right. These charts are going to be what you want to use when you're playing online cash games. Online cash games against good, strong opponents without an ante in play. Okay? So first chart's probably good for loose, live poker, etc., etc. These next two charts are good for online cash games. Next, we have 100 big blind heads up charts. These charts are going to be good for, 100 big blinds heads up with no ante in play, which is the common game you're going to play online when you are playing heads up. If you sit down and play an online cash game, this is what you're going to be playing. I realize a lot of people don't play online heads up because the game is very, very tough at this point because, it's not all that hard to look at charts and at least start playing reasonable ranges. There are also a lot of tools that can help you learn to play heads up cash games. And, that makes the game hard. As there are fewer variables in play, the game gets easier and easier. This is why games like Limit Hold'em become solved, because your only options are check or bet a specific amount, right? You don't really have all that many options. As your options are limited, the game becomes easier. This is how it is. Like, for example, tic-tac-toe is a little bit easier than checkers. And checkers is easier than chess, right? Because you have way more options in chess than you do in checkers. Especially than you do in tic-tac-toe. All right. So these are for cash games, as you see here, make it clear. These are for cash or tournament, loose splashy ranges. Next, these are three that you're going to really want to lean on these four you're really going to want to lean on if you are playing tournaments. These are 75 big blind implementable GTO charts, 40 big blind charts, 25 big blind charts, and 15 big blind charts. This presumes you have this amount of chips. This is the effective stack. Now, you got to realize there are certainly scenarios where, let's say you're 15 big blinds deep. Let's say you lose a lot of chips early in the tournament, but everybody else has 100 big blinds. If they raise off of a 100 big blind stack and it folds to you with 15 big blinds, your strategy is going to be pretty different than if everybody else has 15 big blinds. Because if they have 15 big blinds, they should have an all-in range and a min-raise range most of the time, assuming that they're in later position. But if they're playing 100 big blinds deep and everybody else has 100 big blinds deep except for you, they're not going to have any all-in range, obviously, pre-flop. So their ranges are going to look very different. You have to realize your ranges are designed based on what your opponent's ranges look like. And depending on the actual stack depth of everyone, that will change. But these presume everyone has roughly this effective stack depth. We'll take a look at some of these in just a minute. Then we also have spin and go short stacked heads up GTO charts. These are when you're playing spin and go tournaments or heads up, so either three-handed or two-handed, generally with short-ish stacks. These are pretty advanced charts. These were designed for our spin and go course by Ryan O'Donnell, who is one of the biggest winners in spin and goes, and definitely check that out. If you like spin and goes, we have a very in-depth course by him. I learned a lot in it. Spin and goes are hard. Spin and goes are hard. Harder than you would think. All right, so let's take a look at the 75 big blind GTO charts. These are going to be somewhat advanced, somewhat in-depth, but I want to show you roughly what we are looking at. What raise sizes are we using? Well, it depends on your stack depth. You raise smaller and smaller as you get shallower and shallower. The charts presume they fold around to you. Yes, if people limp in front of you, the charts go out the window. Now, you have to understand that I realize in a lot of games, people limp a lot. You have to realize, though, if they're limping a lot, they're not playing anywhere near GTO. They are playing far from GTO if they are limping a lot. I'm sure you can design some GTO strategy that has some limps, but if most people are limping a lot, then you're going to find that they're not playing well. And if they're not playing well, your strategy will adjust pretty far from GTO strategy. What is GTO? GTO means game theory optimal. It means that if, essentially, it is the best strategy against the best strategy your opponent can present. If your opponents are playing a worse strategy than the best strategy they can present, then you should adjust to take advantage of them, which is why we have these charts right up here, the exploitative preflop charts, to take advantage of what I think most people are doing wrong in small stakes games. Okay? That said, we have plenty of content on Poker Coaching about how to play against limpers. Definitely check that out. But yeah, so whenever you're playing 100 big blinds deep, I think our charts presume a 3 big blind raise and a less than pot 3-bet, slightly less than pot 3-bet in position, slightly bigger than pot 3-bet out of position. As we get shallower, like right here, 75 big blinds deep, I think we're looking at 2.5 big blind raise size. Obviously, as you raise bigger, you have to raise tighter because you're risking more money, right? When we're playing 15 big blinds deep, we're using minimum raise, right? Okay, so let's take a look at this. This is our raise first in strategy. You need this chart. Go to pokercoaching.com and download it. It's nice and easy right here. You can click this download button. It'll download right to your computer just for you. How about that? All right. Actually, check out pokercoaching.com/charts. I don't actually know what's there. I didn't look at it before the video, but something's there. Something's at pokercoaching.com/charts. So here are our raise first in strategies. And I want to make it clear, these are implementable strategies, meaning I looked at a GTO chart and I made it to where every hand is played 100% of the time as opposed to using mixed frequencies. What I mean by this is, let's take a look at the button range here. Has us raising 54.8% of the time. I realize this may be a little bit small on your end. It's okay. You'll be all right. Go and download it if you want to follow along. We actually have the GTO charts over here. Here is the GTO preflop tournament chart. Let's look at roughly 80 big blinds deep on the button. Raise first in, and this has us playing 55.6% of the hands, but notice like right here, for example, the 9-7 offsuit raises 89% of the time. Okay, not quite 100. That means you're actually supposed to fold this hand 11% of the time. Doesn't matter if you play at 89 or 100, not really, right? There will be plenty of other spots where the differences will be bigger, like right here. See, we have the Queen 9, you're raising it 32% and folding it the rest, or this Queen 4 suited, you're raising it 24%, folding it the rest. If you wanted to make these charts more implementable, what you would do is maybe never play the Queen 9 offsuit and play every Queen 4 suited, for example. Basically, you take all these that are using mixed frequencies and kind of combine them to make roughly one hand. Now, it is worth noting there are 4 combinations of hands here. There's 12 combinations of hands here, though, because there's 12 combinations of each offsuit hand, besides pairs, and there's 4 combinations of each suited hand. So this is like one combination, whereas this is 4 combinations. So definitely worth noting, which is why I said take these 4 or 5 combinations, just put them here. Yeah, you'll be like a tiny bit tight. It's not that big of a deal. So anyway, in this scenario, notice every hand is being raised or folded when they fold to you. We are not limping anything. Okay, small blind strategy is all mixed up. Let's focus on this. Can I zoom in on this? Let's see. See if we can make the internet function for me. Here's a small blind range. All right. You see, in this spot, we are limping 75 big blinds deep with the absolute best hands, a lot of medium strength hands, and a lot of junky hands. We're raising with most of our good but non-premium hands, and some hands that are like, okay. Interesting strategy, right? Let's show you what the GTO strategy is. Again, these charts, by the way, are what you would find right here for GTO preflop tournament charts, GTO preflop cash game charts. These are the same tools that are in our app. These are all available on your phone. So we go 80 big blinds, small blind raise first in strategy. Look at this mess. Look at this mess. Notice, a lot of these hands up here are raising, hands in this vicinity, and a lot of hands in this vicinity are raising. Okay? Now the strategy we will have made here is going to be close, not exactly, but close to these strategies if you added up all of these tiny slivers of red and put them in roughly where they generally like to go. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be kind of close. If we look at 60 big blind preflop charts, by the way, you'll see you're raising a little bit more, right? That's because our positional disadvantage is lessened because we are shorter stacked, right? So now you see you're raising a little bit more, mostly with the hands, again, in this vicinity and hands in this vicinity, right? So let's take a look at this chart. We're raising 15% of the time, limping 30% of the time. Oh, sorry, 70%, folding 15. Take a look at this chart here. We are raising about 15%, limping about 70%, folding about 15. So roughly the same frequencies, right? But we're using a strategy such that you can just raise every Jack 9 offsuit. Or God, I can't read today. Every Jack 9 suited. It's early in the morning for me. So anyway, these are implementable charts. They are not perfect GTO. You will lose a little bit of money compared to the perfect GTO poker, but I promise you, this strategy here is very difficult to implement because, I don't know about you, but I can't remember Jack 2 suited raises 31 and limps the rest, whereas 10-2 suited limps 40 and raises the rest, and Ace 2 suited limps 19, and I keep saying fold. What is wrong with me? And calls the rest. Holy moly. What a day. Today's going to be a long day. I fully had plans to sit down and work on my next poker book today. Maybe that's not a good idea if I can't put words together. So anyway, these are implementable charts. These are not the GTO chart, but these are close to the GTO chart and going to be way easier for you to use. All right, next we have facing a raise first in versus under the gun. So this is when under the gun raises. I believe these presume 9-handed. And we are next to act. So somebody raises, they fold to us. Okay? Somebody raises, they fold to us. If we are in early position versus an early position raise, we do re-raising with our best hands, plus a few of our blocker hands, right? Hands that are perhaps not quite good enough to call, like Ace 5 suited, King 10 suited, King 9 suited, King Queen offsuit, Ace Queen offsuit. Calling the hands that flop well enough, folding everything else. Notice this gigantic folding range. Most people do not fold nearly this often. We can actually come over here to these charts and take a look and see if this is roughly what these say. We would be under the gun +1 versus a raise from under the gun. And you see, you got to be really, 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 really tight. Notice small pairs can call sometimes, but it's not like they're slam dunk calls. Notice they're folding a lot of the time, calling sometimes. We're re-raising hands in this vicinity, right? Some blocker hands down here, blocker hands up here, calling the hands that flop the best, like Ace Queen suited, Ace Jack suited, Ace 10 suited, King Queen suited, Queen Jack suited, Jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, etc. Okay? So you'll see that this implementable strategy is not exactly the same, but it's relatively close. This strategy is actually going to be a little bit tighter because these charts presume 9-handed, whereas this other chart I showed you here presumes 8-handed. So this chart's going to be a little bit wider than this chart. But whatever, close enough, right? You can extrapolate a little bit. Next we have hijack or low jack versus under the gun raise. Now you see that we get to call all the pairs, right? You get to call all the good strong suited hands, etc., etc. So here we can go over here, say that we're in the hijack versus raise from under the gun. And now you see we do call all the pairs, call the good suited hands, 3-bet most of the hands in this vicinity and this vicinity, right? By the way, if you are listening to this, I definitely recommend you check out youtube.com/poker coaching. Okay? Let's see. What should we do if your opponent raises value-heavy cards, but either flat or fold when they want to see the flop? Well, if your opponents play poorly, you just need to figure out what your opponents do that is wrong. Right? You got to figure out what your opponents do that is wrong. If your opponents only raise and re-raise with the best hands, just fold a lot or call with hands that are getting the right implied odds. One thing I want to point out, though, very important, when you're looking at pre-flop charts like this, you want to look for patterns. You don't just want to look at these charts and try to memorize them. Memorizing charts is not how you go about succeeding at poker. You do need to roughly know how to play them in all the common scenarios, but at the same time, you want to understand why the GTO strategy does what it does and how to actually go about implementing this. So what I want to show you, let's take a look at this. Playing in a tournament 60 big blinds deep versus an early position raise when we are in position. And this is actually going to occur when you are in position ever against a raise. If your opponents raise and you are in position, take a look at what your re-raising strategy looks like. You re-raise your best hands basically every time. Aces, kings, queens, ace, king. And then you re-raise hands that are not quite good enough to call. What are those? Well, it's going to be hands in the bottom portion of your playable range, which in this scenario, King, Queen offsuit, Ace, Jack offsuit, Ace, 10 offsuit, so the weakest offsuit hands that are playable, and then a lot of Ace X suiteds and King X suiteds. You're going to find that if all the Ace X suiteds are good enough to call, then maybe start re-raising them more King X suiteds or some suited connected type hands. But you're going to find that always you are re-raising with a polarized strategy. So if you look at this implementable strategy, this is how they are all designed when you are in position against the raiser. So you see, you're re-raising the hands that are at the bottom of the playable range for the most part. When you're out of position, this is different. When you're out of position, it's different. But when you're in position, it is always going to be roughly that. So take a look at button versus low jack or hijack raise first in right here. You see you're re-raising your best hands, 10s and better and ace king, Then you're re-raising a smattering of suited connected type stuff. Then you're re-raising ace 9, king 10, queen jack. And you can confirm this when we look at button versus raise from low jack. You'll see it is roughly that. We're re-raising our best hands, roughly jacks and better, ace king and better, maybe ace queen suited, and then some hands that are not quite good enough to call. And you're going to find that if you want to make these implementable, you can essentially take all these hands like ace jack, king jack, ace 10 offsuit, and just shove them down to the weakest offsuit hands that want to 3-bet. That's going to be, in this scenario, queen jack, king 10, and ace 9. Okay? And you're going to find this is very common. It occurs over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, let's go down here. If we look at cutoff, or button versus a cutoff raise, you see, again, lots of the weakest hands are going to be 3-betting. The weakest hands that are playable. The weakest hands that are playable are going to be re-raising. And as we see, same thing. Again, GTO strategy is using much more mixed strategies, but I don't think you need to really do that. I mean, unless you're playing against the absolute best players in the world, you really do not need to worry about being perfectly mixed in these scenarios. Like, for example, take a look at these king x suiteds, right? In this scenario, GTO preflop strategy wants to 3-bet king 10 suited, king 8 suited, king 7 suited, king 6 suited, king 5 suited, and king 4 suited, some portion of the time each, mostly skewing towards the lower ones, right? Notice king 4 and king 5 re-raise more than the others. So in this scenario, what you can essentially do for simplicity is take all the king 10, king 8, king 7, and king 6, and just load them into king 5 and king 4. And you're going to be roughly correct, right? You may not have exact perfect board coverage like GTO wants to have, but you're re-raising the ones that would prefer to re-raise. And if you're losing any money compared to GTO, it's going to be very, 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 very minimal. Okay? So, let's take a look at now what we do from the small blind versus raises. You're going to find small blind versus raises. Typically what you do is you re-raise with your best hands. Pretty linear for the most part. Same thing from the big blind. Similar, slightly different linear strategy from the big blind, because in the big blind you are closing the action and you don't have to worry about somebody yet to act calling, right? You're going to find in both these scenarios you re-raise pretty linearly, meaning you just re-raise with your best hands. As you see in this scenario, small blind versus low jack or hijack, you see mostly linear, usually skewing towards suited connected hands that are quote-unquote bluffs. Big blind versus low jack or hijack, same thing, calling a lot, but skewing towards these suited connected high card hands in basically all these scenarios. Okay? You should all hit the like button, says Robert. Well, if you're enjoying this, click the like button. If you don't enjoy it, go do something else. I do my best to give you all good, applicable content that will make you better at poker. Let's take a look at this messy chart here. Here we have small blind strategy when they fold around to you, okay? Look at this mess. Can't get this on the screen. All right, this chart here, this is what we're focusing on. We have a bunch of ranges here. This essentially consolidates a bunch of charts into one. So you can play roughly a GTO strategy against a good player when they fold to you in the small blind in a tournament with ante in play. Also, this presumes they're not taking a rake out of each individual hand like they do in a cash game. You pay your rake in tournaments up front. There is no rake taken out of each pot. Okay? Let's take a look at this chart. We have raise and 4-bet. 75 big blinds deep with the hands in red. Which hands are in red? We have pocket queens, ace queen, ace jack, and ace 5 suited. Limping and re-raising those. I'm sorry, raising and then 4-betting those. So we raise, they re-raise, we 4-bet, and we're getting our money in with these hands. Ace 5 suited is a bluff. Ace jack offsuit is kind of a bluff. Ace queen and 8 and queens are just good enough to get in, and ace queen has great blockers. You may ask, why not do that with aces and kings and ace king? Well, we have to make sure we're protecting our limping range. Because you got to realize, whenever they fold to us in the small blind, we have a raising range and we have a limping range in this scenario. If you raise everything, you have to play too tightly. If you limp everything, you don't get full value with your good hands. Okay? So we are raising and then getting all of our money in with the hands in red. The hands in blue are raising and then calling a re-raise. These are going to be hands that flop pretty well, that have a lot of value. So we see a lot of these good, strong, high-suited hands, like ace jack suited, ace 9 suited, king 10 suited, queen 10 suited, pocket jacks, pocket 10s, and king 10 offsuit. So we're raising and then calling re-raise with those. We're raising and folding with our trashy hands that we decided to raise. King 6 offsuit, 10 8 offsuit, 8 7 offsuit, jack 2 suited, 10 4 suited, 6 4 suited, etc. These are hands that raise, but then if your opponent re-raises, you have to get out of the way because they're in pretty rough shape. Okay? So when we raise, we have some hands we're raising and just getting it in with. We have some hands that are raising and then calling the re-raise. And when we have some hands that are raising and then folding to the re-raise. It's going to be a good, strong, roughly GTO strategy. Next, we have our limping range. We have our limp and then re-raise range. That's going to be our absolute best hands. Aces, kings, ace, king, ace, queen suited, king, queen offsuit. Then some ace, x offsuit bluffs and king, 5 offsuit bluffs. So we have some really good hands and some junky hands. When we re-raise the best hands, we get it in. When we re-raise the junky hands, we do not get it in. King, queen offsuit does not get it in, I gotta presume, by the way. All right. Then we have our limp and then call of a raise. These are gonna be all of our hands in the middle portion of our range. All these hands that flop well enough. Okay? All the good high-ish, middle-ish card offsuit hands. Lots of suited hands that opted to not raise, besides the weakest ones. And then we limp and then we fold to a raise with our weakest hands. Now this raise presumes, what would this must presume? It probably presumes a 3 big blind raise. Okay? So we are limping and folding for only 2 big blinds more with our absolute junky offsuit hands, like queen 5 offsuit, 8-6 suited, 5-4 offsuit, etc. It's okay to limp and then fold. If your opponent raises minimum, you're going to have to defend wider, right? So these charts presume normal-ish raises, right? So these charts presume normal size raises. Therefore, if you limp and your opponent makes it 7 big blinds, obviously you're going to play way tighter. You get to fold out way more hands if your opponent's making it gigantic. If your opponent minimum raises, you have to defend way wider, right? So this is going to be roughly a GTO range. And as we saw over here, if we were, let's say, 80 big blinds deep in the small blind, raise first in, you see we're doing this very, very mixed strategy, very difficult to implement, but we kind of consolidated that. Then let's say we are versus a raise from the big blind. And now you see, very clear strategy. We re-raise our best hands. That's right, small blind versus big blind raise. Yeah, we re-raise with our best hands. We re-raise with a smattering of junk. We again consolidated this. If we do versus 3-bet from big blind, as you see, this very polarized strategy, we re-raise our best hands. These right here. Notice the smattering of all suit bluffs. By the way, this would be when we raise and then get re-raised. So this would be when we raise and then get re-raised. Notice our strategy will be a little bit different because we're using very mixed strategies, but we roughly consolidated this. So when we raise and get re-raised, we would be re-raising with our best hands, right? But notice our chart is a little bit different in this vicinity because we don't have this strategy built in, because we're using these very, well, 100% frequencies as opposed to mixed frequencies, which is why these charts are going to look a little bit different. But you see the same patterns, right? You're usually bumping more money into the pot with the best hands and blocker bluffs. The best hands are usually getting money in plus blocker bluffs. If we look at versus big blind raise, you see same strategy. We're re-raising with the best hands, putting money in with blocker bluffs, calling with all the hands in the middle. If we do versus 4-bet from, I guess it can't be against 4-bet, versus 4-bet all in, versus 3-bet all in. Where is my position? Here it is. Versus 3-bet all in from the big blind. Notice we call with the best hand. So if we raise, or we limp, they raise, we re-raise, they shove. I think that's what we are looking at in this scenario. Versus 5-bet all in, we just get in with the best hands if we somehow find ourselves in the spot due to pot odds. But anyway, realize it's a complicated scenario, but this one chart here kind of layers a lot of this on top of each other. Again, it's not perfect GTO, but it's going to be very implementable, and you're going to be perfectly fine if you use this strategy in general. Okay? Is this small blind versus big blind? Yes. That's what I said. This is when they fold to us in the small blind playing somewhat deep stacked. Okay, why are hands like king 10 suited, 100% 4-bet, etc., etc.? Again, you want to be re-raising with some blockers, and usually the king x suited blockers are pretty good hands to do that with. Now, to be clear, whenever you're looking at the GTO chart by the time you get to that point won't be 100%. It'll be 100% of all king 2 suited you have, right? So let's go back over here and look at small blind raise first in. Notice right here, king 2 suited only, let's say it raises. If we raise, they re-raise, and we 4-bet. We only started with 6% of king 2 suited anyway. So it's basically no combinations of king 10 suited, or king 2 suited, right? Which is why you have to be careful with the GTO charts, because you're like, oh, look, I re-raised king 10 suited 100% of the time here. But you have to realize you start with king 2 suited almost never, because you would have limped it almost every time. And you'll see that very often whenever GTO takes a line very, very infrequently. Later in the hand, if you still have that hand, which you almost never do, But if you do still have that hand, then GTO will play it 100% that way. Where can you find this site? Go to pokercoaching.com, my training site, log in, and it is right here in the tools section. This is the GTO preflop tournament, or GTO tournament preflop charts. Okay? Also, it's available in the Poker Coaching app. Download the Poker Coaching app. If you are not a paying member of pokercoaching.com, you'll have some access to this. If you are a paying member, you will have, well, if you're a premium member, you have access to everything. Okay? We give away some stuff for free, not everything for free. We actually are going to be adding heads-up charts to the GTO preflop tournament, or to the app very soon, with and without a big blind ante in play. We're also going to be adding ICM charts for various scenarios. A lot of trading sites out there, by the way, charge lots of money for just charts, like $100 a month or $500 a month for literally just preflop charts. We give all of them just included in the membership because, hate to break it to you, it is expensive. It is time intensive to get these charts online, but once they're online, right? And anything that we can just spend $10 or $20 or $30,000 getting the resources available, and then we're just kind of done. Like, I'm all for making that stuff and giving it away, or at least including it with the premium membership at pokercoaching.com. All right, let's see. What are all of you saying? A lot of you are concerned with how to play against limpers. Fortunately for all of you, if you go to pokercoaching.com, you can go to, let's just go to classes. This is a test. I don't even know what this is going to pull up. Give this a second. I type limp in the classes section. Here we have a class by Lex and Gabby that came out recently. How to play limp pots and small stakes cash games. Perfect. Probably exactly what a lot of you need. Small blind limp pot strategies by me. Crushing limpers in general by me. Multi-way limp pots from the blinds. Combating limpers. All this is available right here for you. These 5 videos here will teach you pretty much everything you need to know about playing against limpers. Also, in the courses tab, if you go to my, let's say, cash game masterclass, I know in the preflop play, we're going to discuss playing against limpers right here, facing limpers. Very clearly, right? You need to know how to play against limpers. We have this 27-minute video on limpers, and then also you will then have quizzes that you should take. Hopefully this works. Tricky limpers may often limp with premium hands. True or false? It's very important to realize all limpers are not the same, everyone. Limpers play different strategies. If your opponents play a strategy such that they limp with all of their junky hands, well, then you can raise them super duper aggressively. If they limp with all their best hands, well, you've got to play really passively. Tricky limpers may limp with their premium hands. So true, they may limp with their premium hands, and that's going to impact your strategy, right? Facing one straightforward limper at 100 big blinds, you can generally just tighten your range slightly and then raise a tighter resource in range, limping behind with hands that are not quite good enough to raise. Facing one straightforward limper, you can generally tighten your raising range slightly. This is a tough one. You could do this. You could not do this. This is where, like, you got to realize whenever you design a quiz, you can't give every single piece of information. Otherwise, you have an essay here. But I think this is probably a reasonable strategy, right? If they're limping with hands that are reasonable, if they're limping with ranges that are trash, you want to be raising pretty aggressively. But if they're limping with reasonable ranges, I think we're going to give this a true one. Yeah. And the reason for this is because you don't really want to be raising hands that are near the bottom of a GTO preflop raising range, because they're going to call you every time, presumably, right? They're limping stuff they want to see a flop with. Now, if they were like awful and weak and tight and passive after they limp and you raise, like say they're going to limp with, I don't know, 9-7 offsuit from under the gun, right? If they're going to limp with 9-7 offsuit from under the gun and then fold it to a raise, you want to be raising pretty aggressively. But if they're going to be limping with mostly decent suited connected stuff, you don't really want to be raising with 6-5 suited, because they're going to call you every time and you're going to be either dominated or just behind in general, right? Now, of course, they're going to limp and then just always fold by the river. Then, of course, that's going to change things. Which of the following are true when facing multiple limpers 100 big blinds deep? You should tighten your raise versus end range significantly unless you know they are all weak. It's probably true. Large ranges may be viable, which is always true when facing multiple limpers. Sure. Bluffing is not an option. No, that's not necessarily true. None of the above. Hope I get these right. I never know if I'm getting these right or not. It's always fun taking quizzes on live on the stream, because maybe you get it right, maybe you won't. Everybody knows that it is memorialized forever on YouTube. Let's think about this. Bluffing is not an option. Bluffing is an option. It depends on your opponent's strategies. Large ranges may be viable. Sure. You should often tighten your range. You should tighten your range significantly unless you know they are all weak. Yeah, you probably should tighten your range a decent amount. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to go with this. Hey, we got it. All right. So anyway, as you see, we have a lot of quizzes. This is just part of the tournament masterclass at pokercoaching.com, or this is the cash game masterclass, actually. We have tournament masterclass as well for tournament scenarios. Lots of quizzes, lots of scenarios. Obviously, we have discussion on how to play pre-flop, the turn, the river, deep stacked adjustments, additional topics, various hand reviews, etc., etc. And in each of these, there are a bunch of topics. Notice here, this is just the pre-flop section. Only about 20 modules for the pre-flop section. Look, you got to realize poker's kind of a difficult game. You got to study it a lot. You got to work hard if you want to be good. It's not as easy as, how do I play against limpers? Because it depends on your opponent's strategies, right? You had to move down in stakes due to fewer games available, and limpers are trappy. Well, good. If they're trappy, it means they're not getting value. If your opponent's limp with their best hands, they are making a blunder because they don't get value. What is deep stacked? I mean, look, you got to realize all these terms are pretty arbitrary. What really matters is what is the ideal strategy in these scenarios based on what your opponent's doing wrong and based on stack depths, right? How do you identify mistakes? You pay attention. You got to pay attention. I literally just made a class on this. I don't know if it's up yet. Every 2 or 3 years, I feel like I have to go back and remake this class of how do you figure out what your opponent's doing wrong? At the end of the day, the answer is pay attention. Take notes. In your brain, when you see someone do something, note it and figure out what the adjustment is. For example, people limp with good hands. What should you do if people limp with their best hands? It's not hard. Stop raising them. Stop raising them with junk. What do you do if they limp with the 9-4 offsuit and fold it under the gun? Raise with all sorts of stuff, right? When your opponents make obvious blunders, it is not actually all that hard to crush them. And fortunately for you, in small stakes games, a lot of people make obvious blunders on a regular basis, which is why your win rate in small stakes games should be gigantic. And if it's not gigantic, it either means you're not playing very well, or the rake is probably way too high. One of the two. But look, I'm telling you, every poker coaching student I've taken on, I don't know very many of them who fail at the smallest stakes games. They all have sort of a floor of being able to make like $30 an hour playing 1-3 no limit. Because it's not that hard to crush players who make blunders left and right. Now, maybe you found the toughest 1-3 game in the world, but most of the time you have not, right? I will say in most small stakes games, a lot of people limp way too wide. Because you have to realize when there is a rake, you will get crushed. So imagine 4 people limp and you're on the button. A lot of people think, oh, I can limp with all sorts of stuff on the button. But not if they're going to take $6 out of the pot at a 1-3 game. You have to play really tight. You may not should have much of a limping range at all there because you're not accounting for the rake, right? You can't limp and have them take 30% of the money out of the pot. It doesn't work. So in games where they rake a lot, you have to be raising or folding very frequently. You know what? Let me show you something, actually. Let's take a look at cash game pre-flop charts. Now, these charts are a little bit different than the tournament charts because now there's no ante in play, so the pot's smaller, and they take a rake out of the pot. This presumes a normal rake, like in an online cash game. If they are raking more, like in some live cash games, you're going to want to be taking these strategies to the extreme. Okay? Let's take a look at this scenario. Let's say low jack raises, and we are on the button. What do you think you should do on the button versus a raise from the low jack? I want all of you to envision in your brain what you should do when the low jack raises and you're on the button. In a cash game, 100 big blinds deep. What should you do with the 9-7 suited? What should you do with the queen 10 offsuit? What should you do with the king 10 offsuit? What should you do with the pocket 2s? Well, if there's ever a spot where you get to have some flat calls, it's going to be the button. So on the button versus raise from low jack, you will have some calls, but you're going to do a lot of 3-betting in these scenarios. Notice, though, most people call way too wide here. Take a look at all the hands that are not good enough. Ace-2 suited, not good enough. King-8 suited, Jack-9 suited, 9-7 suited, 8-6 suited. 6s, 5s, 4s, 3s, and 2s, not even particularly good. King-Jack offsuit, Ace-10 offsuit. Just fold. Right? Just fold. So in these scenarios, you have to realize that most people play way too tightly. Also, a lot of people do not 3-bet nearly often enough as a bluff. Notice that the only hands that get to call in this scenario are hands that get to flop especially well. Like the best suited hands, some pairs, and ace-queen offsuit, and that's it. You don't get to call with anything else. You may be shocked that this is how tight you're supposed to play. But let's take a look real quick at what the low jack strategy is. It's actually really tight as well. Notice low jack doesn't get to raise all that many hands either because, well, there's a rake in play and there's no ante, right? So low jack, which is under the gun 6-handed, should just be folding hands like 5s, 4s, 3s, and 2s. Just open fold. Pop it right in the muck. Notice queen jack offsuit. Pop it in the muck. Ace-9 offsuit. Muck. Jack-9 suited. 9-8 suited. 8-7 suited. All these hands are not good enough to play. Okay? So if all these hands are not good enough to play, when they do raise, they have a pretty good range. And if they have a pretty good range, you in turn have to be quite tight. Now this is where you have to ask, are my opponents actually playing the GTO strategy? And the answer is obviously not. If they're obviously not going to play this tight, then what should we do? Right? Well, we should loosen up a little bit, but not a lot. Not a lot. You should not loosen up a lot. I think a lot of people loosen up way too much. If anything, you want to loosen up with hands that flop well. You can kind of look at this kind of chart and extrapolate a little bit. Look at the hands that opt to call. The hands that opt to call are going to be the hands that are mostly suited and connected. So like maybe King-8 suited, Queen-9 suited, Jack-9 suited, 9-8, 8-7, 7-6, 10-8, 9-7, small pairs. Those hands would become calls if your opponents raise a little bit too wide. And I think that's fine and reasonable. Why is ace-jack offsuit a call and not a raise? Well, ace-jack suited calls every time because it flops well. All the hands that flop well really would prefer to call and not re-raise. Because if you re-raise, it becomes pretty gross if they 4-bet you. Whereas when you re-raise like king-queen offsuit or ace-jack offsuit, you can easily fold, right? If your game has a time rake, or they charge you when you go in the door, like some clubs do, you get to play a little bit looser. You do. You get to play a little bit looser. Not quite as loose as the tournament charts recommend, but a little bit looser. Actually, when I say a little bit, maybe I mean more like a lot looser. Let's actually compare this to the tournament chart. What are we looking at? Button versus low jack raise. Let's look at button versus raise from low jack. So it's going to be somewhere between these two charts. Notice this chart here is a lot looser, right? When we're playing with an ante and no rake, we 3-bet 8.3% compared to 6% when there is a rake and no ante. We call 8% in the tight scenario. We get to call 16% in the loose scenario. So we do get to call substantially more on the button in these scenarios. Obviously, all pairs call here. Can't get it on the screen. All pairs call. But take a look at the strategies that are being used, right? The same rough selection of hands are still the hands that like to re-raise. You just make the range a little bit wider, right? So we see in both scenarios, the ace-x suiteds are the hands that are opting to re-raise mostly. Same scenario here, ace-x suiteds and then king-x suiteds. And like I said, whenever you widen your range, sometimes you see like the queen-x and then the low suited connected hands going for re-raises more often. Also, the worst offsuit hands are the ones that usually err towards re-raising. The worst offsuit hands are playable, right? So we see like ace-10, ace-9, king-jack, queen-jack, king-10, etc. What is a quote-unquote standard rake for 1-3? I believe these charts presume at most a $3 rake or $4 rake. I realize in live cash games it's going to be higher. In most live cash games now in Vegas, I think they take $5 per hand, give or take. I don't know, actually. I haven't played them in a while. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. In mini games, though, they take like $6 on every flop, no matter what it is, which is high. A lot of games take a bad beat jackpot, which counts as rake because you basically never collect it back. That money is just gone. And even when you do collect it back, the casino often takes 10% for administration fee because you had to pay them to administer this bad beat jackpot. So it's just rake on top of rake on top of rake, right? Someone said more rake is better. More rake is not better. People on the internet misquoted Dale Negreanu. I'm a big fan of not taking people's words out of context. I think that's a pretty lame thing to do. People have done that to me. They'll go through and they'll read one of my books and they'll take a sentence that, if you read it out of context, maybe sounds inaccurate or sounds wrong or sounds overly mean or sounds overly weak, whatever, right? And then they will take it out of context and propagate it on the internet to try to make me look bad. I think it's pretty lame to try to make people look bad by taking things that they did not actually say and or mean and spreading that unnecessarily. I think that's, well, it's a good way to get people angry and excited and rabble-rousing, but it's also a way to just be a liar, right? So don't be a liar. All right, let's see. So anyway, you see that in these scenarios, the same rough selection of hands are re-raising, but you're just using a wider range, right? A wider range. Yours is $10 an hour at 1, 3, and 2, 5. That's not so bad. $10 an hour at 1, 3, and 2, 5 is definitely beatable. Back when I used to play at Bellagio a lot, it was $12 an hour at 5, 10, and 7 at 10, 20, and that was very beatable. Very, 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 very beatable. Okay, so anyway, as you see, we have these charts, but I wanted to show you when you're playing a cash game, you have to tighten up a lot. Let's show you another spot where you have to tighten up a lot. Let's look at big blind versus a raise from the low jack. Big blind versus a raise from the low jack in a cash game. You see here, we want to re-raise with only our best hands, some suited ace-x, some suited connected hands, and then call, again, hands that mostly flop well, and fold all the garbage. Fold all the garbage, right? If you look at a tournament chart, though, you're going to be substantially wider. And that's because we're getting way better odds. So notice in a tournament, we get to call, I'm sorry, let's look at our folds. We fold 34% of the time in a tournament. We fold 78% of the time. 78% of the time in a cash game. We're folding substantially more. Why are we folding substantially more in a cash game compared to a tournament? Which, funny enough, is the opposite of what actually happens in a lot of small stakes games. In a lot of small stakes games, people call with all sorts of garbage in the big blind, thinking, all right, let's see the flop. Why would they be doing this? Small minds discuss people. You nailed it, Louis Philippe. You nailed it. Well, the reason they do it is because they're bad and they came to gamble. But the reason you should be way tighter in a cash game facing a raise is because they're going to take a rake out of the pot and there's no ante in play, right? So let's imagine you're playing a 1-3 game and someone raises to $12 for big blinds, which is quite common, right? You'll see players use way bigger raise sizes in cash games than they do in tournaments. Why? I don't know. Say they make it $12 and you're in the big blind. You're getting pretty bad odds to begin with, but say you do call. Pot would normally be $25, right? They're 12, you're 12 in the small blind. But then the casino rakes, let's say, $5 out of that pot. So now you're putting in 9 to try to win 20 total, which means you need to realize, what? Can we do math here? Let's pretend it's 45% equity. I don't know what it is. Do you think you're going to realize 45% equity out of position with a bunch of junk? Obviously not. You're not realizing anywhere near 45% equity because your opponent's going to raise a reasonable range and they're in position against you. Compare that to a tournament, though. You have to put in 1 or 1.5 big blinds, depending on how big they make it, to win how much? Let's say they make it 2.5 and you're going to call. It's their 2.5 plus your 2.5. That's 5, plus the big blind ante plus the small blind. That's 6.5. You have to put in 1.5 to win 6.5, which is what? Like 22% equity. It's not hard to realize 22% equity, which is why you get to call with all sorts of stuff in a tournament, right? You still don't get to call with the worst offsuit hands. All the worst offsuit hands fold. But like literally every suited hand plays because it's not that hard to realize 22% equity. But in a cash game, you're supposed to fold a ton of hands because it actually is pretty hard to realize 40% equity. It's hard to realize 40% equity out of position unless you have a very good hand. Okay? Everybody talking about raise sizing. Look, you got to realize your raise size should not depend on the raise size of your opponents. What a lot of people make a blunder of doing is they model their strategies after their opponent's strategies. They think, all right, my opponents do this, therefore I should do this too. But I hate to break it to you, if you're playing the smallest stakes game in your casino, your opponents are probably not good. Because if they were good, they would have moved up. So if they did not move up, it presumes they're not good. Now, of course, some people may say, oh, I don't want to play where I can lose a lot of money, whatever. They have all sorts of nonsensical reasons. But most people, if you can make, let's say, $50 an hour or $20 an hour, it's your choice. Would you rather make 50 or 20? Most people would pick 50. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Actually, I'm not wrong about this. Most people would pick 50 because 50 is greater than 20. So you have to ask, why would I like to model my strategy after the players who are playing especially poorly to the point that they cannot beat the softest game in the room? And there's no reason for this. So when your opponents all make it $20 pre-flop at 1-3, you should not think that that is normal. That's not normal. It's awful. And everybody at your table is making this blunder, which is great for you because it means you found a gold mine. Okay? So how much should you raise it to? I don't know. $8, $9, $10, something like that? I think it's fine and reasonable. Now, you may say, if you raise to $8 or $9 or $10 and you're going to get 7 callers, that's terrible. It's not terrible. It's not, I mean, it's fine because you got to realize if you're playing only strong-ish ranges, as you should be, and your opponents are calling with all sorts of junk, you may be putting in 1/7 of the pot, but you're going to get back 1/5 of the pot on average. You can do math, right? If you put in 1/7 of the money and you get back 1/5 of the money, they're just giving you 2 or 3 big blinds every single time. It's amazing. They're just giving you money as fast as they can. Now, of course, you're going to have variance. You have to realize variance exists and everything is okay, right? Now, you may say, but some hands don't want to get 7 callers. Sure, you know, if your opponents are really this legitimately terrible, maybe you raise bigger with your junkier offsuit hands, like the ace-jack offsuit or something, because that's a hand that doesn't especially want to see the flop 7 ways. That said, I mean, my entire live cash game career, I've crushed them by using a 2.5 or a 3 big blind raise size across the board. I'm sure there are some spots where you can make plays where, like, let's say, you know, the big blind's especially awful, but the button's pretty good. Imagine you're in the cutoff, right? Button's good, small blind's good, big blind is a super bad calling station. Maybe you do want to raise quite big then, because then you're going to make the reasonable button and small blinds fold a lot, and the big blind's still going to call with all sort of garbage out of position. So they're kind of like taking advantage of this exact uncommon scenario where raising big will get you heads up in position against the fish. So, like, I mean, that could occur, right? And that's a logical spot you should hopefully be able to see. But for the most part, you don't want to be blasting it, because when you blast it, people start to play tighter. And as they play tighter and tighter, your edge goes away because their ranges become more and more reasonable, right? As your opponents start folding out the garbage or the weaker hands, those are the hands you're getting the most value from. So imagine you raise to $20 at 1-3 and you get 1 caller. What do you think they're calling you with? Probably something that's okay, right? I mean, now, of course, they may still just be calling with the 9-3 offsuit or the Jack-4 offsuit for fun, but usually they're not. Usually they're not. Some luckbox says your standard open is $7 to $10 pre-flop and they call you a fish, but your graph would argue otherwise. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Understand that your job as a poker player is not to make your opponents think you're good at poker. Right? Your job is to win money. Now, of course, sometimes you do want your opponents to, well, to be fair, you want your opponents to think you're a fish, right? You want them to think that you're bad at poker. You want them to think you're bad at poker because then they'll continue playing with you forever. I remember back in the day, there were a few poker players on the World Poker Tour who would min-raise every hand that they played. And everybody back then thought that was really bad. Turns out it was actually really good, and they smashed the games until people figured it out. Now everybody min-raises. Maybe they luckily figured out the strategy. That just happened to be what they did. Maybe they were ahead of the time and they'd been studying a lot. I don't know. To be fair, a lot of people were super geniuses in all other games, so they were probably just smart and good. They were ahead of the time, right? All of us idiots read books from 2002 that said you should be raising the 3.5 big blinds pre-flop and then potting it on the flop, but it turns out the best players don't do that. They raise minimum, and then they bet minimum in a lot of scenarios. By the way, we have an advanced tournament course coming out very soon, and we discuss spots where you should be continuation betting minimum. 1 big blind to do a 6 or 7 big blind pot. That's something I did not do until about 4 or 5 years ago, and that means for the first 15 years of my career, I was losing money. I was playing poorly. I was losing equity in those spots, right? Because I and nobody else had ran the GTO solver with a minimum continuation bet size, because that seems insane. Why would you ever bet 1 big blind? Aren't they going to call you every time? Well, no, they're not every time. Also, they're not going to raise nearly often enough. And even if they do, GTO still recommends the 1 big blind size. especially when you have the range advantage, but you completely lack the nut advantage. And again, these are like terms and ideas nobody really understood back in the day, or if they did understand it, they didn't really didn't know how to make good use of it, right? You have a question about the ranges. Well, feel free to type it. What will change against, let's say, a 9-handed table? You defend versus an under the gun raise on the button when there's a caller in between. So yeah, if there's a caller in between, you have to call way tighter in general, especially with the offsuit stuff. Suited hands, you can probably defend a little bit wider. Offsuit hands, you have to defend way tighter. It's especially true with the weakest hands in the defending range. Like, take a look at this spot here, right? Let's say, what is this? This is when blowjack raises, we're in the big blind. I don't know the exact GTO strategy in the spot, if there's a raise and some caller in the middle, but I can guarantee you, all these junky offsuit hands in this vicinity are going to be folding. So like Queen 6, King 6, King 7, King 5, 7, 5, 6, 4, 5, 3, 4, 3. All these offsuit junky hands are going to be folding. Because while you're getting better pot odds, you're just way more likely to be super duper dominated one way or the other. Also, the ace X goes way down in value. Suited hands as well, the junkier suited hands are going to start folding in this spot. In a cash game, though, if we were in the same scenario, I don't know if I would defend much tighter with a caller in the middle, because all these hands that are calling are pretty reasonable to begin with. I may actually widen it a little bit with some of these more suited connected type hands closing the action, but I definitely would not play wider offsuit, because your offsuit range is going to be super dominated, whereas the suited connected hands, you kind of know you're trying to flop a hand that can beat a hand like pocket aces. When does the advanced tournament course come out? It comes out in about a month. I actually sent an email to Poker Coaching Premium members the other day. You can get early access. Help us to go through and make sure all of the quizzes are lined up correctly, etc., etc. We have a lot of content coming out soon. We have content by myself. We have a heads up course by Jonathan Jaffe, who's an absolute crusher, and Justin Saliba, who just won his second World Series of Poker bracelet. We also have an ICM course for various spots with payout implications, with a lot of content from Rampage Poker, who's been crushing it, and his coach, Brock Wilson, who's also a poker coaching coach, one of the absolute best tournament players in the world. He's maybe studied more than almost anybody else in the world, and he knows how to play these spots better than almost anyone, and his results prove it. So make sure you check that out. I have a large amount of content as well. I discuss a lot of scenarios where you should be using either really, really big bet sizes or really, really small bet sizes, because I realize in my tournament course, my tournament masterclass and cash game masterclass, we discuss a lot of the common scenarios, right? And while that is fine and good, to use a somewhat simple strategy of either, let's say, a third pot or 2/3 pot or pot, sometimes you're supposed to be overpotting it, right? I realize this. Good players realize this. And I want to share a lot of the common scenarios for you so that you know spots where you do need to be betting tiny or where you need to be betting very, very big. How do you adjust to turbos and hyper turbos? You really should not adjust based on the speed of the tournament all that much, if any, because you're just playing this individual hand. And if your opponents are doing anything like playing way too loose or whatever, they're just throwing money in the garbage. If someone is new and they want to learn, what should they do? Go to pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. If you go to the courses tab on pokercoaching.com, we have the Master the Fundamentals course. It'll take you here. pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. And as you see, we have this video series here. All of these are videos. They're only about 10 or 15 minutes long each. Goes a little bit farther down there. And it goes through all the common things you need to understand to be decent at poker and make use of the content at pokercoaching.com. Now, I realize some of this stuff is super basic, like hand rankings, right? Hand rankings are super easy. If you know what beats what, well, it's not necessarily easy, but it's basic. It's required knowledge, right? So if you already know hand rankings, you can, of course, skip that. But go to pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. That's definitely what you need to do if you are new-ish to the game. How do you go about studying preflop ranges? Go to pokercoaching.com. Go to the tournament or cash game masterclass. Look at the tournament masterclass. For example, we have a whole preflop section here. Preflop strategy, right? Click on preflop strategy. These are all the things you need to know to be good at preflop poker. If you learn everything in this section, you're going to be far better than most anybody you encounter at the table. Okay? So definitely check that out. What's the difference between the old Cash Game Masterclass and the new one? The first one was sort of a test. We made it about, I don't even know, 6 or 7 years ago at this point. And it was not anywhere near as in-depth as the current one. As you see, this Tournament Masterclass and Cash Game Masterclass are something like 60 hours long. The old one, a long time ago, was about 8 hours long. Also, there are a ton of quizzes in these, which really ensure you are learning as you go. you can get a whole lot of more good, concise knowledge in a larger course than you can in a crash course. Essentially, the older one was more of a crash course. And as I've gotten better at teaching, and as I've learned more and more about poker, I'm able to share the knowledge with you better. All right, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed talking about all these pre-flop ranges. Again, make sure you get the poker coaching app. If you go to the pokercoaching.com website, click on tools. The app is just right here. It'll take you right to the page where you can download it, hopefully. Look at that old iPhone. Anyway, you can get it on Apple or Google. Just make sure you get that on your phone. If you don't want to use it on your phone, you want to use it on your computer, you can go right here to the GTO tournament preflop charts or GTO cash game preflop charts. Like I said, we're adding heads up charts with and without an ante very soon. And we're also adding ICM adjusted spots very soon as part of the advanced tournament course that's coming out in about a month. Also, go to pokercoaching.com/charts. Check it out. Why don't you stream online poker? I live in New York City, and I don't especially want to show off any sites that operate illegally in America. I used to stream some, but it's not a good look. It's not a good look to do that, in my opinion. That said, I am going to the Bahamas in January, and I will definitely be recording some content. I don't know if I'm going to be streaming because their internet usually is not especially good there, but we'll definitely be recording a lot of content there for poker coaching members. I mean, look, if you have to realize, if you go to the courses tab here, we have a lot of content by me. And even like the tournament course, I mean, I randomly upload deep runs. But down here, if we go to hand history reviews, these are all the hand history reviews and deep runs I played over the course of like 2 months of making this tournament course. So look, I just want to show you this. So we have Sunday session, played an entire long Sunday. We had some wins in here. 15-hour long session of just me sitting there grinding it out. Then we went through and reviewed various hand histories. We have a $50 win, another $50 win, $150 second place, $630 win, $1,000 third place, $1,000 PKO second place, $88 into these are satellites, so 88 into 2,600, 100 into 2,600, 100 2,600, $500 win, right? And this is all over the course of like 2 months. So, I mean, we have plenty of content of me specifically playing there at pokercoaching.com, so check it out. That's me for today. Again, that's just in one course. We have a lot of cash game content too. That's me for today. Good luck, have fun, make the most of your opportunities. If you're a poker coaching member, go to the community tab. Right down here in the corner. Oops, trying to send me to Discord. I do want to go to Discord, but I don't want to go to Discord. If you click on the community tab, right here, it'll take you to Discord. And then from there, you can get in the study sessions tab where Louis Philippe runs the poker coaching study sessions. I think we also have cash game sessions running now. We have some that are generally focused towards tournaments, some that generally focus towards cash games. And make sure you get in those. Those are starting right now. Are you planning to win WPT? I am not. My Decembers are ruined because I have 2 kids and both their birthdays are in December. So I do not get to play poker in much of December, but I am going to Hard Rock in late November for whatever their tournament series is called. They have a lot of good tournament poker there. It's a nice place and it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, my Decembers are no good. There's a lot of good poker tournaments in December, but such is life. What is RFI? It means raise first in. That means if they fold to you, what do you do? Yeah, before you leave, click the like button, click the subscribe button, please. I'd appreciate it. Click the like and subscribe button, please. That's how you let the computers know you like this. All right. Good luck, have fun. I'll talk to you all next time. Make the most of your week. Thank you for being here. And run hot.